am also the author of a chapter in the Encyclopedia of Forensic Sciences on shooting incident reconstruction.
And how about, Mr. Haig, any forensic presentations of note?
I very regularly present both at conferences as well as for organizations on this area of work.
Can you tell us what certifications are offered in the area of firearms identification and comparison work?
The primary certifications, which certification applies to an individual, and accreditation applies to a laboratory, so those are terms you'll often hear mixed, but certifications available and that are relevant to what I do include 3 from the Association of Firearm and Toolmark Examiners, 1 in gunshot residue and distance determination, 1 in firearm identification, that's the examination of microscopic tool marks, as well as toolmark identification, the examination of microscopic tool marks from other things besides guns, like screwdrivers and hammers and things like that. And then when the International Association for Identification had a certification, they've discontinued it, for crime scene reconstruction as a whole, I applied for and took that. All of these tests involve both the knowledge test as well as a practical examination. And the AFTI ones, which are still active, of course, require recurrent training and testing.
Have you been recognized and testified as an expert before in a court of law?
I have.
Approximately how many times?
At last count, I think I'm getting close to 100.
And where have you so testified?
Primarily in the area where I worked for most of my 30 years in New Mexico, in Albuquerque. But in addition to that, all across the country, to include states like California, Texas, and Rhode Island, and I'm not sure if I've been to Florida before, but many, many states across the country, and courts ranging from district or regional courts, state courts, to federal courts and military court martials.
Mr. Haig, have you given your opinions in high-profile cases before?
I have.
Give us an example.
The cases that come to mind would be Aaron Hernandez in Boston. That was a high-profile homicide trial. I've been involved in the examination of physical evidence in places like Taiwan, even for presidential assassination attempts. I've worked cases from Iraq and many other places that I lose track of.
Are you an instructor in any areas of forensics?
I am.
You've written on the subject as well?
I have.
And you provide regular training in shooting reconstruction?
One of the areas that I actually gain a lot of pleasure from is instruction in shooting incident reconstruction. So this is the examination, as I said, an evaluation of any physical evidence when a shooting takes place. That can involve the crime scene itself. It could involve trajectories. It can involve a wide variety of things within that sort of umbrella title. But I've taught a shooting incident reconstruction course for almost the entire last 25, 26 years of my career. They're week-long live fire shooting courses. So this isn't just a thought process. I go out and shoot things so that people that do what I do, crime scene investigators, forensic scientists, even pathologists, can come and see how these shootings take place and understand what they're looking at when they go into a scene. So I do that very regularly, especially now that I'm retired. I'm able to do about 4 to 8 of those a year, it seems like.
Is the assessment of bullet trajectories taught in your SIR courses?
It is.
Can you describe for us what a 3D laser scanner is?
This is a tool that I actually feel very lucky to have helped brought into the crime scene realm. It's an engineering tool, technically. But if you think of a laser rangefinder, a very simple one that you might aim at something, push the button, it shoots out a bullet of light. Light travels at a very consistent speed. So when that light is reflected back to the sensor, time is measured, and we then can calculate a distance because of that time and the known speed of the light. That's one bullet of light. A 3D laser scanner is an engineering tool that sits on a tripod and has such a thing inside of it, but spins in a 360-degree azimuth, left and right, and also is able to shoot out the laser beam in a vertical path as well. So imagine in this room shooting out millions of bullets of light and collecting individual data points on a very accurate scale and then blending all those individual data points together. You get a representation of reality. You get a computer takeaway of your scene. And then you move that system from one place to the next so you can move around corners and you can blend all of these data sets together so that you really take the crime scene with you. So I was lucky enough with my police department to help start this theft of this technology into crime scene back in about 2005. And since then, many departments have also seen the value of it, particularly with trajectories, in my opinion. And it's become a very common tool across the country and internationally as well for crime scene investigation and shooting reconstruction.
Mr. Hay, can you define for us what exactly a trajectory is?
When I'm describing a trajectory, I like to think of it or describe it or liken it to a snapshot in time. If you imagine yourself in a dark room, completely dark, and things are moving, and you set off a strobe from a camera, let's say 3 times in that dark room while things are moving around, then you've really frozen things in place for that brief instant while the strobe was going off, or in our case, when a shot is going off, because bullets move to our perception of reality in a very fast manner, of course, and so if a bullet, say, goes through something and then strikes something else, it can help us orient those objects that are struck, and indeed then where the firearm is as well. So snapshot in time is how I tend to think of it, but it's a way of understanding where things were, including potentially the firearm itself, as well as objects that are struck.
All right, so you come upon an investigation, if you will, of a shooting incident and you reconstruct it, correct?
I try to.
All right, now would you tell us the significance, the importance of trajectory as it relates to that reconstruction?
In forensic science, you in very many ways have to throw out what you may have seen with regard to TV. Most of the things that TV puts out are completely false. But the beauty or interesting thing about trajectories with regard to shooting scenes is that fact that it gives us a way of assessing where things were in those moments of time. A person in my role may not be able to say exactly what happened in between them sometimes. Sometimes there's a logical progression of what might have happened given the physical evidence that we do have. But in my job, I basically lay the pieces of the puzzle on the table, meaning what physical evidence I have to look at from a shooting scene. And that could be the projectiles, the cartridge casings, the firearm itself, or trajectories, the room, and then try and see what snapshots in time we may have available to rebuild.
Is there a distinction between what you've been referring to as trajectory and wound path?
Wound path is sort of a subset of trajectory. Wound path refers to, indeed, just that, the path a bullet took or created when it goes through a body part in specific, or a body. But in each case, the accuracy and the meaning of those trajectories can be evaluated, because bullets, for the most part, there are exceptions, tend to travel in more or less straight paths. Like I said, there are absolutely exceptions to that, particularly with, we're not dealing with, in this case, non-expanding rifle bullets. But we look at these paths as relatively linear. Every measurement taken by human beings is an approximation, though. So an understanding of how much accuracy to place on those measurements and that documentation is absolutely, of course, important as well. With trajectories into things like walls, when I have good points to work with, or data from somebody's scan of a trajectory rod in place, for example, typically about plus or minus 5 degrees is what I've found from my work, and what I would call a industry standard in my work around a measured trajectory, around a straight line, if you will, that was created by something like a trajectory rod. With wound paths, it can be a little more difficult, and this is something I've lectured on to not only the pathologists in my area, who I worked closely and well with and helped train when they'd come in as fellows, and that I've lectured on at the Swiss Wound Ballistics Workshop 2 years ago, I think, and was asked to lecture on, is the idea that not only are trajectories in bodies a little bit more inaccurate because the way they're measured and how bodies move, we're not walls, we're not rigid. So we have to indeed look at those as a little bit more of an approximation. But for the most part, with things like we're looking at here, expanding handgun bullets, that category, we can describe them or think of them as relatively straight lines as documented. They give us an idea of where a firearm may have been at the time a shot was fired based on that path. So wound ballistics is a subset of just trajectory. They're related.
You may have alluded to this. If you did, my apologies. What is the degree of accuracy of trajectory reconstruction?
With regard to common things that I typically deal with in crime scenes, like walls, sheet metal in cars, desks, almost anything you can think of, I shoot in my classes to demonstrate this and basically check ourselves and see how accurate we are, about plus or minus 5 degrees. So I'm motioning with my hands to make sort of an arc. So if my primary line of measurement, we're going right down the center of my wedge here, I'm making a visual representation of approximately plus and minus 5 degrees, a 10-degree cone overall if you rotate that into 3 dimensions. But I think I can show you that later.
What steps did you take in preparation for your testimony here today?
When I do a case review such as this, there are materials that I typically would like to see in order to help inform myself on what evidence, what pieces of that puzzle are on the table to include, particularly documents, things like crime scene images, autopsy images, autopsy reports, lab reports, all the documentation that goes around a typical investigation, as well as 3D laser scan data, if it's available, amongst other things.
And in this case, did you examine all the evidence that was available to you?
I actually forgot to mention that. In addition to that, in this case, I did examine the actual physical evidence, meaning the projectiles, cartridge casings, etc.
And when you say projectiles, we're referring to the bullets.
Correct.
All right. And this information that was provided to you by the county, correct? By the sheriff's office crime scene?
Which information were you talking about?
That you were able to review in preparation for your testimony here today.
I think technically I received it through you, with the exception of the 3D laser scan data, meaning the documentation, the crime scene of photographs and autopsy reports.
Do you recall whether or not you actually came to the sheriff's office to do a review of the evidence?
Absolutely.
All right, let me ask you with that preface to tell us, please, about the projectiles in this case.
The examination of the projectiles helped me understand, in a way, where they'd been. This is sort of one of my main areas of interest, is the damage to projectiles, sometimes, depending on their condition when they finally come to rest, can tell us something about where they've been and what they've hit, especially if we're dealing with particular types of projectiles, such as we're dealing with in this case, which are expanding handgun bullets. This basically means that we're dealing with a construction that is designed to change shape if that projectile strikes something that is liquidy, and we are mostly liquid, so that would include tissue. A hollow point projectile is typically designed such that it has an external jacket made of copper. So my hands here are representing copper, and then that goes around it in 360-degree rotation. So in this demonstration, my finger's pointing up. That's the way the bullet would travel. A hollow point projectile has just indeed that, a hollow point cavity in the nose of the bullet. And it is designed that way such that if it's traveling stably, nose forward, and that hollow point cavity encounters something liquid, could be a gallon of milk sitting on a countertop, doesn't matter, or tissue, the liquid actually goes into that hollow point cavity, and because the bullet is traveling forward, you build up hydraulic pressure, liquid pressure, just like the brake lines in your car, inside that hollow point cavity. And so pressure inside that hollow point pushes the sides of the bullet open, and it comes open like this. So if I take my hands and make the model bigger for you, the jacketing material, the copper jacketing material that's facing forward as the bullet travels, when it encounters something liquid and expands, some people like the term mushroom, I don't prefer that term, but when it expands or encounters soft damage, the pressure builds up, and so that jacketing that was facing forward actually peels backwards, down, and around, but it leaves you with a forward-facing area of the projectile that's greater than the original caliber. In mushrooms, you get greater surface area presented to the way it's going. And when you do that, you increase drag. And when you increase drag, you decelerate or slow that bullet down more quickly. And so these bullets undergo, or created through intense engineering by people at the companies, such that they go a preferred depth in tissue or tissue simulant. So the main reason for hollow points in handgun in particular, whether that's somebody in law enforcement or somebody interested in protecting themselves, as opposed to going to, say, the range, would be to control penetration depth. So this bullet will stay in one body, and you don't overpenetrate and go through further. When I work cases that have non-expanding bullets, often called full metal jackets, typically you can see overpenetration. You can go clean through one person and on into another. So that's the hollow point cavity mechanism.
Where were the bullets in this case, Mr. Haig, recovered?
From my review, there were 4 fired cartridge casings and 4 projectiles and 1 small lead fragment that were recovered. And we can kind of go through these because this brings into play a term called the limited universe, meaning we limit our options. We take pieces of that puzzle off the table and put them in their place. So, for example, 1 bullet was recovered at autopsy. The entrance gunshot wound was listed as over here on the right chest, as I recall, and the bullet was recovered in the back of the decedent. That bullet, in my examination, shows soft damage, expansion, just as I would expect from bullets of this type. That bullet's wound path in the torso is well documented, and so we can kind of take 1 of 4 off the table in that the entrance hole, primarily for me in the shirt, is a nice round hole indicating that it was not unstable, tumbling. Before it got there, this is basically a nice stable bullet entry, and that bullet was recovered there, so that's 1 of 4. Another bullet was recovered after going through one of the walls of the bedroom and through several cabinets into a bathroom area. And under examination, when I looked at that bullet, it initially looked mushroomed, which is why I'm not a fan of that term, because it had the visual appearance of it, but it was just deformed. Instead of the jacketing material unfolding as I described before, how bullets do in tissue, it was just collapsed. So if you see pictures of this bullet, which, as I recall, this is bullet number 11 in the crime scene images, I believe, while it looks fairly mushroomed, it does not demonstrate soft damage, and the hole going into the bedroom wall is, again, a nice round hole, indicating that that bullet was stable when it struck the wall, had not struck something else first. So that's 2 of our 4 bullets that are sort of off the table, and we kind of know somewhat what their story is. A third bullet was recovered down a hallway from the bedroom and in a wall. And other crime scene images indicate that it had gone through things like a book, I believe a part of a mattress, and maybe a book holder before it got to the wall where it was recovered. Examination of this bullet was very interesting in that it shows no signs of any sort of soft damage or even mushrooming in the nose. The nose is in its basically initial condition, but it has a very classic and typical characteristic to it that I demonstrate in my recon class when I ricochet bullets off materials at shallow angles. So when I say ricochet, I mean the bullet came in at a shallow angle and continued on along its path. It's a flat spot on the ogive is the part of the bullet we're going to talk about. It's the rounded part from the nose down towards what's called the bearing surface or the cylindrical portion of the bullet. So it's a big flat spot because things like tile, what we describe as unyielding surfaces, meaning they don't give, the bullet takes up the damage, create those flat spots. In addition to that, when you look at the flat spot, you see scratches or stria on it from dynamic interaction with the surface, and those lines go straight from the nose to the base. That tells me this bullet, when it struck tile, is the likely thing in this scenario, the floor, it was stable. It was going nose first to get that flat spot and be scratched directly from the nose to the base. It then continued on down range and was stuck in the wall. That bullet gives us some idea of some trajectory, even though it's stuck in a wall just barely. You can, in the crime scene images, see it stuck in the soft drywall because it's downrange from the bedroom where all of the fired cartridge casings, biological matter on the floor is, but that hallway gives us sort of a path, a trough that the bullet had to have passed through. There were no other documented impact sites in that area, so we have what's called ballistic accessibility. It creates a path into the bedroom area. If we assume that's where the firearm was, which is a logical assumption in my opinion, based on the cartridge casings, the biological material, that doesn't overlap with another trajectory. I'll come back to that in a second. Our fourth bullet is found on the floor in the bedroom. in the middle of the floor. Its position to me does not really mean much because it's laying there just on the floor where it could have been kicked, could have been moved slightly. So we don't know where else it might have struck in that room. But the key thing about this bullet, and this is bullet number 5 as I recall, is that it does show soft damage. It is expanded. In the images you would see the jacketing material is peeled directly back and is facing rearward. The damage to this bullet tells me it went through tissue, something soft and liquidy, not things like wood and drywall or glass, but rather tissue. In this case is our limited universe option. So this bullet, number 5, would have had to have gone through the gunshot wound to the leg, which as I recall enters on the interior left portion of the leg and exits out to the right side of the leg itself. So those 4 bullets, and each one has a story to tell about what it did or did not strike.
When you speak of tissue, we're speaking about tissue of the human body.
I am.
Okay, just so we're clear. Now, did you bring with you today any slides or any type of diagrams that will assist you in your explanations?
I have 2 things that fit that bill. I have the Manatee County's 3D scan data with trajectories for one shot that I could show, as well as images I took of the 4 projectiles that I just mentioned that would help illustrate my points if you need me to.
All right. Before we get to that, let me just finish up the wound path. I'd like to ask you about the wound path to the shot in the chest. Are you able to say, based upon your training, experience, and education, whether or not that wound, where the shooter was relative to that wound?
Of course, I wasn't there for the autopsy, but experts rely on each other's reports in order to formulate opinions. The entrance is generally on the right, front side of the chest here. The bullets were covered in the back left area. Because bullets of this type, expanding handgun bullets, travel in relatively straight lines when they go into tissue. If you simply extrapolate those lines from the autopsy report, it gives you an idea of where the firearm was. I typically speak in terms of the firearm itself as opposed to a person. Of course, a firearm is just a machine, so it typically has an operator. So how that person is directly placed with the firearm is beyond my physical evidence examination ability. But the firearm, if you put a line straight back from where the bullet entered to where it went, it gives us our best approximation of where then a firearm would have been at the time that shot was fired. Again, that snapshot in time.
Are you able to reach any conclusion with respect to the order of the shots?
There's nothing in this from the physical evidence standpoint that allows me to sequence these shots 1 through 4. If one starts to make assumptions, which some people recoil at the word assumption, as long as you have a legitimate reason for saying the word assumption or are willing to describe its validity, we make assumptions in science all the time. It allows us to make further steps. So, for example, we have 2 trajectories through the body. We have 2 trajectories into objects in the crime scene. If I look at the trajectories just within the crime scene, one that has to go through that long hallway, and one that we actually do have some data for to figure out where the firearm was that just goes into the wall within the bedroom, and we look at those 2 trajectories, they don't overlap, meaning there's not a physical possibility for the firearm to have been stationary between just those 2 shots. I can't tell you, with regard to sequencing, which one was first, but if you make an assumption that the firearm, if you're the firearm, I mentioned right to left, moved from right to left, then the one down the hallway would have to have been before the one into the wall, if that's the hypothesis. If we take the opposite hypothesis, it's opposite left to right, that's where witness statements come into play to evaluate whether or not the physical evidence supports or refutes a witness statement. You never take a witness statement, and in my line of work, believe it. You look into what the physical evidence supports and then cross-compare them. So if you have information or an opinion or a statement that the firearm was indeed in motion from right to left, the physical evidence for those 2 trajectories would support that. As far as the body, for me, this case doesn't help too much because I focus more on the scene in this case. Others have focused on the body. But with regard to the scene itself, with the body itself, certainly we have an idea of where the firearm was relative to that body, but because those bullets don't then continue on to hit other things within the scene, I don't particularly have an opinion there that would lead me to allow me to then say sequence those in order.
Do you have an opinion as to whether or not the deceased was stationary or moving?
If we assume that the firearm was relatively stationary, and by that I don't mean a matter of 3 or 4 feet, I mean the firearm is not circling about the room, going out in the hallway of this incident, or otherwise, if we take the position that the firearm is generally just in the bedroom and is pointed in the same relative direction as the 2 trajectories that I've described for you, then it would have to be that the decedent was in motion, because we have trajectories in the decedent's body that are almost opposing. Goes this way, and as I read the autopsy report, the other gunshot wound enters the inside of the right leg and comes out. Reason or another. So given that, to me, those trajectories in the body indicate to me.
With respect to the firearm itself, are you able to draw any conclusion whether or not that was in motion as well?
Certainly within the degree I've described before, with the 2 trajectories that I can show you, the one that goes in the wall, for those that I can demonstrate by physical evidence, there was some motion. And as I recall from my measurements in the 3D scan data, it's something like 4 or 5 feet, at least, from one position of one trajectory's area over into the area of the other. As an approximation, again, because, again, trajectories are approximations. Otherwise, beyond that, no.
So would it be safe to say that your conclusions support the fact that both the deceased as well as Miss Benefield would have been moving from right to left?
I can't tell you that the firearm moved from right to left at those shots. A statement of such would be supported by those 2 trajectories that I mentioned.
All right, would you please demonstrate for us now from the slides that you brought how you reached the conclusions that you did?
Sure, it'll take me just a minute to set up the laptop.
Yes.
Yes, please, Your Honor. Thank you.
What I'm showing you here is the 3D scan data of the scene. So I didn't take this data. This was done by Manatee County investigators. I took the individual scan worlds and then blended them together. This is a process called registration. And I'll move you through it. Hopefully we don't get a jump between my laptop and what we see on the screen. So again, this is not a computer game. These are actually millions of individual data points. You can see in some of these places the individual spots. Each one of those is a data point collected by the scanner. And as we look down on the scene here, you're looking at the sort of wood-looking floor. You can see a tape on the floor. And now I'm going to switch perspective such that we're going to slide down to the side to allow you to get a feeling for what we're looking at. So as I move through this, you're now looking towards the doorway, exiting the bedroom, over the top of the room.
Mr. Haig, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Please.
This is the room where the shooting took place.
That's my understanding. There are certainly fired cartridge casings, 4 of them in the room, as well as a bullet hole going into the wall here.
Okay, and that would be the mattress on the right-hand side that was leaning against the wall?
That's correct. Where I'm moving my hand cursor right here in the data is a mattress.
Okay. And are you able to, from that perspective, yet see the entrance to the room?
Yes, I can swing us around so that we look into the room even, if you wish. So as I come down in the data, I can put us in the doorway.
Okay.
So that's a view into the room, and we can then even come into the room in that manner and pan around and see the room. Within the room, as I mentioned, we have a perforation into the wall, a nice round hole. As I recall, this is impact site 11 maybe, but if I swing around here, I can actually show you where that is. So the shadows you're seeing on the wall here are from the tools the investigators use. These are very common tools in our industry, trajectory rods. For this type of scanner, they often put a sphere over that rod, so that's why you see a round shape there as well. But the main point here is that there is an impact site in the wall right here. That's where a bullet hole exists. From that, I took 2 different approaches to create this trajectory for visualization for you. One, I simply took the scanned data, basically their trajectory rod in place, and looked at the many, many data points on that and extrapolated a line from it. If we use that method, the trajectory for that looks like this. So this is the blue line that comes out of that, and I'll swing you directly above it so you can get what's called the azimuth viewpoint first. I'm going to click us back into what's called an orthogonal view. So looking at this trajectory, you can see how as viewed, it has a slight left to right aspect to it, and it's traveling from the bottom of the screen as you're seeing it into the wall at the top of the screen. Now, the county investigators did a nice thing. They did 2 different ways with this trajectory, not only the trajectory rod itself, but they took the rod and then put a laser on one end and shined it across the room, so the bottom wall as you're looking at it here, and measured where that dot was on the wall. So I simply took their data and connected the dots also. So between the perforation in the wall to their laser dot, and that line looks like that, so green and blue. In the trajectory world with walls, this is decent agreement between these 2 methods as far as the accuracy that we come to. And in fact, if I put plus or minus 5 degree cones, I talked about the error earlier, on both of these, we can see that those 2 cones look like that. That's actually a 10 degree cone for each of them, the green and the blue. And so from the data that I have for this case, for this one shot, I would include any area within that cone, either one of those cones, as the area where the firearm would have been at the time that shot was fired. I can also show you this from the side view to give you an idea of the vertical component. So I'm going to remove the left wall of the bedroom as you're looking at it here, and I'm going to swing you down. And from this vantage point, you can see how there is a downward component to these shots as well, going into that, I believe, again, number 11 hole within the bedroom.
Would that be consistent with Miss Benefield firing the weapon while she's standing in the upright position?
There are certainly multiple places along these cones where a shooter could be standing. So basically any hypothesis or any scenario that puts the gun in those cones, including that one, would be on the table. So we've seen the up and the down, the vertical component here. We've looked at the azimuth, the left and the right from above. What I'll demonstrate for you now with the data is I'm going to take you to the right.
If I may, Mr.
Please,
Hagan,
yeah.
As to that bullet, for the trajectory that you've just shown us, there was no indications that it had struck tissue. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I'll show you that picture of that bullet eventually. But this bullet, based on the damage that the bullet shows, as well as the nice round hole going into the wall, this is a miss of the decedent. This did not strike the decedent. If I take you to the side of the cone here, the far right side of the rightmost cone, our most right option, from that position directly over it, if you look down the hallway area, you actually, there, the fill in, you actually cannot see where that bullet struck the wall. This area right here is to the right of the bullet's impact site. We actually have to move, as I will now, over into this area. And I'll get us right at the edge of the wall. We have to come all the way over here in order to get to the impact site, which from my examination of the images is more in this area. So somewhere on the tile in here is a bullet impact site, a ricochet off the floor. That bullet goes on and then barely perforates the drywall or penetrates the drywall up in this area. So,
And that's another bullet, is that correct?
correct. Sorry, I'm on to bullet 19, as I recall, was its designator for those two.
Let me recap for just a minute. So one goes in the wall, and then one goes down the hallway.
That's correct.
And again, you can't say which shot was first or second.
I don't have physical evidence that would allow me to establish that, correct. But that bullet in the wall down there also expresses no soft damage. It is also one that did not strike the decedent.
A miss.
A miss.
All right.
So from the 3D laser scan data, and I don't have a good trajectory or a good impact site to look at here. I was unable to go in and examine the floor. If I'd been able to find that impact site, I might have been able to refine that trajectory into the wall a little bit better and give us a more defined trajectory. But other than the ballistic accessibility aspect of going down that hallway, I can't do that here. Just they're two separate trajectories that have some slight divergence in the lateral aspect.
Okay. Did I ask you what the degree of accuracy is for trajectory reconstruction?
I think we covered that turf, just that plus or minus 5 degrees is an industry standard, and based on having shot a lot of stuff, including walls, for a trajectory like that, assuming the trajectory rod was placed properly, about plus or minus 5 degrees is appropriate.
Did you have an opportunity, Mr. Haig, in preparation for your responsibilities in this case to interview Miss Benefield?
I wouldn't describe it as an interview by me. I was certainly present while she described the incident.
And with respect to her description of the incident, is there anything at all in your conclusions that was inconsistent with Miss Benefield's description?
I can't think of anything that would necessarily be inconsistent. The key points that come to mind, where I remember her saying she stepped from her right to her left during the course of fire, that the decedent was moving rapidly in all sorts of patterns or manners, which would fit with the gunshot wounds entering the body in different angles. So from that perspective, no.
Give me just a moment, Your Honor, please.
Yes, sir.
That's all, Your Honor. Thank you, Mr. Hague.
Ross?
I just have a couple of quick questions. So you were able to give opinions about where the trajectory would be for the two shots into the walls, correct?
That's correct.
But as for the injuries into the human, you cannot opine about that.
That's correct. I don't have any other sort of anchors to bring the decedent's body into play with the scene because of the lack of perforation.
Okay. And with reference to the chest wound, I saw you kind of turning it several times. So, and we've had terms used such as front and side. So if you could just show the jury, where was this entrance wound?
To the best of my recollection, and of course I could refresh my memory with images if it's helpful, but to the best of my recollection, it's in this general area on the side of the chest, and then it goes in, is recovered just under the skin in the back. So if you're sort of the firearm location, it would place the upper body in a vague general orientation like this.
So if you turned your body straight.
Oh, this way?
Right. Can you keep turning until you get to the point where, okay. So that's approximately the positioning of the gun to the body.
For the upper body, yes. I'd have no way of, yeah, correct, yeah.
Thank you. No further questions.
Redirect?
No, sir.
Can this witness be released?
Yes.
Yes.
Sir, you're releasing your subpoena. You're free to go.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you. It's going to take you a minute to put that away, and it's about 10 minutes after 3, so I'm going to give you your afternoon break. Give you 10 minutes, go on back, stretch, get something to drink, maybe a little snack if you want it, and we'll get you back out here as soon as we can. So no deliberations, don't talk with anybody about the case, and don't do any research. All right? Figured that'd be better than having you.
Hustle. Thanks, sir. Appreciate it.
All right, we'll stay at recess for 10 minutes.
Thank you.
not sure which one that was on. I think it was on
On the
young Mr. Galvano.
yes.
So we find to use him as a
Yep.
exhibit. And who's this last witness going to be?
This is Dr. Emma Luke, Your Honor, LEW.
Well, don't bring her in yet. I was just asking. While we're on the subject, how long do you think she's going to be? More than an hour?
Probably not. I would say maybe 45 minutes, my best guess.
No problem. I just versus 4 hours.
Correct.
All right.
No problem.
State, have you already deposed her?
Yes.
All right. So you know she's going to say,
Yes.
presumably what your question is going to be.
Yes.
I only ask because that will take us, assuming we start in the next 5 or 10 minutes, 5 minutes, to 4:20, and I guess at that point probably let the jury go for the evening. Well, you can announce you rest. We can let the jury go for the evening. You guys can say if you're going to call any rebuttal or not, but then maybe one pass through the jury instructions. I'd appreciate that.
So would I.
Okay.
Judge, the last thing the state wants to bring up is that we didn't bring it up during the question, but I think that Your Honor had clearly told Mr. Taylor at the bench what he was allowed to ask Detective Warren, and that did not include, don't you find it odd that the state did not call you as a witness? And I think we had litigated close to that issue, if not directly on point, and then you directed him not to. And I know we're down to a few witnesses left, but it's been an ongoing attempt to subvert justice by Mr. Taylor to continue to do things like that, speaking when we've objected and continuing to speak. And as to the don't you think it's odd, it was actually Mr. O'Keefe who told Mr. Taylor, hey, you need to object to this. So that's a whole different objection I have, that Mr. O'Keefe continues to practice law in this courtroom. But I just think that at this point, the state is asking for you to sanction Mr. Taylor in some capacity about disregarding your continued rulings. And I understand that that may not be something we address right now, but it seems to be an ongoing issue in the state. That last one with Detective Warren was the most outrageous.
Okay. I'm not going to take that matter up right now.
Yes.
We got witnesses and other matters to deal with, so.
I just wanted to get it on the record before we move too far away from the witness. Thank you for letting me be heard.
Absolutely. All right, looks like we've got everybody back. Is Dr. Lou ready?
Yes, sir.
State, are you ready?
Yes, Judge. Thank you.
We'll do that right now.
All right. We'll bring him in. Do you need the
I don't think so, Judge.
All right, y'all can have a seat. Welcome back, everybody. Any deliberations, contact outside the jury about the case or research? Everybody says no. All right, Mr. Taylor, call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The defense calls Dr. Emma Wu.
Case in front, raise your right hand if you sworn.
You solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Good afternoon, Doctor. My name is Judge White. I'm presiding over the case. As the deputy said, just make yourself comfortable in that chair. Get about 12 to 15 inches from the microphone. Just speak in a loud, clear voice. It does adjust up, down, left, right if you need it.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Would you tell us your full name and spell your last name, please?
Yes, my name is Emma Lew, L-E-W.
And do you hold any professional degrees?
Yes, I am a licensed physician in the state of Florida, so I have an MD degree.
All right, Dr. Liu. Let's take a moment. Let me just run you through your undergraduate education. Where
Yes.
did you receive that?
I graduated from the University of Saskatchewan College of Medicine in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada.
And following your college degree, you attended professional school?
I did a one-year rotating internship in Vancouver, British Columbia, and started my pathology training in Vancouver. I completed my pathology training in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, worked for 3 years as a staff pathologist at the Royal University Hospital, then came down to Miami in July of 1991.
And with respect to your work experience, what brought you to Miami-Dade County, Dr. Liu?
I wanted to train in the best facility that there was for forensic pathology, and everyone in Canada and in the States said, go to Joe Davis in Miami. So I did.
And did you eventually rise to the position of the medical examiner for Miami-Dade County?
Yes, when I was in training, I was an associate medical examiner. Then Dr. Davis offered me a permanent staff position, and I was an associate for 10 years.
I want to ask you if you can tell us, if you can approximate the number of autopsies that you've performed.
In Miami-Dade County, it should be at least 5,000.
As part of your duties as a medical examiner in Miami-Dade County, Dr. Liu, did you also respond to crime scenes?
Yes, we responded to scenes of violent and suspicious deaths.
Would you tell us why? Well, first, let me ask, is it typical for the pathologist to respond to crime scenes? And depending on that issue, why you chose to do so?
Yes, in Miami-Dade County, when law enforcement needed a medical opinion, whoever was on call as the medical examiner would respond. And the purpose is twofold. Number one, so that we can provide an opinion about the circumstances of death or the types of injuries on the body, and also for our benefit, so that I can see or we can see the body in the context of its surroundings and be able to better interpret our findings at the time of autopsy.
Do you teach any courses?
Yes, I used to teach in the medical examiner death investigation course, and I still teach for the Carnival Cruise Lines security conference, and I will be lecturing in the Miami-Dade Police Homicide Investigations course.
And how about gunshot wounds? Have you taught courses in gunshot wounds?
Not entire courses, but I have taught the section about gunshot wounds in death investigation courses.
Let's not take anything for granted. If you'd be kind enough, would you explain to us, Dr. Liu, what is an autopsy?
An autopsy is the examination of a dead body. It consists of two parts. One we call the external examination, and that's when we look at the outside of the body and describe such things as height, weight, color of hair, eyes, scars, tattoos, any evidence of medical intervention, that is, any evidence that paramedics or doctors and nurses may have treated the decedent, and then any evidence of injury. After looking at the outside of the body, both front and back, and in the orifices, then we do the internal examination. And that's when we open up the body cavities to examine all of the organs and tissues inside the body cavities, from the brain inside the head down to the pelvic organs. That is an autopsy.
Dr. Liu, were you asked to assist in this case?
I believe I was, yes.
Would you tell us how?
I believe you contacted me.
And what did you do in preparation for your testimony here today?
I reviewed the autopsy report. I reviewed some of the autopsy photographs, and then other circumstantial evidence, as well as having spoken also with Mrs. Benefield.
Okay, I need you to try to keep your voice up. Did that include being present for Miss Benefield explaining what had happened?
Yes, I had made a previous trip to Bradenton and had met with Mrs. Benefield.
I'd like to ask you, Dr. Liu, about the gunshot wounds in this case.
Yes.
Will you tell us how many there were?
There were 3 separate gunshot wounds.
And would you please explain them?
Yes. One was a superficial gunshot wound on the right upper arm. And that we call a grazed gunshot wound. That was one of the gunshot wounds. Shall I explain the direction?
Please.
Now, you probably heard about pathways of gunshot wounds from Dr. Vega. But as a quick refresher, if, for example, a gunshot wound was from front to back and right to left, that is relative to the person shot. Not to you, not to Mr. Taylor, but relative to the person shot. So if it's from front to back and right to left, it is coming in from the victim's front towards the back and from his right side towards his left side.
And was there another gunshot wound?
Yes, there was another gunshot wound on the right side of the chest, just outside of the right nipple.
Please, the trajectory.
And yes, the pathway of that gunshot wound happened to be from front to back and right to left. And I'm sure Dr. Vega told you it just nicked the bottom of the right fifth rib, went through the right lower lobe of lung, then through the part of the spine, the bone of the spine, then the left lower lobe of lung, and then nicked the back of the left 10th rib.
And lastly, was there a third gunshot wound?
Yes, there was a gunshot wound. This time it was a through-and-through gunshot wound, or what we call a perforating gunshot wound, that entered the inside back of the right thigh, went through both right lower leg bones, and came out the outside of the right lower leg just below the knee. And that pathway was from back to front, left to right, and upward through the right lower leg.
Let me, if I may, using the easel, show you a picture And have you explained to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you mentioned that the abrasion wound to the arm, did you tell us what the trajectory was for that?
In my opinion, the pathway of that bullet was from front to back, upward, and slightly left to right.
Okay, so how, Dr. Liu, are you able to reach a decision like that on something like an abrasion wound?
Through experience and training, having had hundreds of gunshot wound cases and seen thousands of gunshot wounds and supervised hundreds more cases.
Okay, let me show you these two demonstrative aids and ask, with court's permission, if Dr. Liu could step down. I wonder if we could have the easel so I could set these up.
Amen.
Dr. Liu, here is a pointer that will help you. Good.
State, feel free to reposition as you need so you can see what's going on.
Thank you, Judge.
With court's permission,
Yes,
I
ma'am, you
ask
can step
Dr.
down.
Liu to
Thank
step
you.
down.
State, have you already seen these?
Yes. Not until now, but I just saw them.
Okay.
You have a preference of which one you'd like to start with? Okay, with this one. All right, would you tell us what that represents, Dr. Liu?
This is the graze or superficial gunshot wound on the outside of the right upper arm. I know there's a
Yes, a rod.
point, a little rod on the knee.
We have three.
Now, the reason I know that this is a graze gunshot wound is, from training and experience. Now, the direction of this projectile, you see this edge is a little bit more rounded, and because it's a deeper red, I know it's a deeper part of the wound than here, for example. Now, as the projectile skips across the skin, because it's so superficial, it raises skin, it causes skin tears and raises skin tags. Now, there's some skin tags here, but the best one is this one right here. You see this V-shaped tag? And for simplicity, how I remember pathways of graze wounds is that the skin tags point toward the gun. So, if it's pointing in this direction, the gun is somewhere along this line here. So the bullet, therefore, is coming in this direction, going from front to back. This is the front, this is the back. Going from front to back and upward. And because it's on this part of the arm, you can see it's slightly to my left, to my right. So this is from front to back, upward, and slightly left to right.
If I may.
This is the gunshot wound that we just spoke about. You can see how it's going front to back and upward. This is the right nipple. This is the second gunshot wound. But it's been a bit changed or altered because the back portion that's straight was an incision made by the doctors in the hospital. So the gunshot wound itself is this round part. Now this is the one that goes from front to back and right to left. The bullet was found by Dr. Vega on the left side of the back. Now, there's something special about this gunshot wound that Dr. Vega may have told you already. After going through the nicking the right fifth rib and the right lower lobe of lung, it then hits the spine. Now, the skull closely surrounds the brain and protects the delicate brain. The spinal cord is an extension of the brain, and the spinal cord is protected by the spine, which is made up of multiple blocks of bone. When a projectile cuts across the bone of the spine, even though it doesn't touch the spinal cord, the energy that is expended by the bullet impacting the bone is transmitted to the delicate spinal cord. And what this bone will do, because the bullet went across the bone of the T10 vertebrae, it causes a spinal cord shock. And the result is paralysis of the legs. I know because I've had cases like this where a bullet not even going through the bone of the spine, just passes by the side of the spine, caused the man to fall on his back, and he was heard to say, "I can't feel my legs." So that's something that's significant and important about this gunshot.
All right. I think you can probably return to your seat if you like. Does it have some water in it?
It does. It's too complex for me.
Let me see if I can help.
Not too much.
Thank you so much.
It's me. I'll leave it right there in case you need it.
Dr. Liu, did you have an opportunity prior to your testifying here today to meet and observe and listen to Miss Benefield explain the events that took place on that day?
Yes, I did. It may have been last year that I did that.
Is there anything at all with respect to your findings that is inconsistent with the explanation Miss Benefield gave?
I believe that Mrs. Benefield's account is consistent with the evidence on the body, and I can demonstrate that.
At the time that you observed Miss Benefield explain these events, did she know what the actual physical evidence was, the actual
Objection.
forensic
Hearsay,
evidence?
Judge.
If she can answer without speculating.
I do not know, however, usually the person doing the shooting does not know about the autopsy results. And even if they got the autopsy report, they would need someone to translate the autopsy report for them. So I doubt it, but I am speculating.
Were you struck by the explanation you received in light of that?
Objection relevance.
I'll sustain.
One last question, Dr. Liu, if I may. How many times, if you can approximate, have you appeared as an expert pathologist and testified in court?
During my career, at least 500 times, and then maybe 20-some times more after I retired.
And the vast majority of those occasions, Did you testify for the defense or for the state?
Most of those times I testified for our state attorney.
I have nothing further, Dr. Liu. Give me just a moment, Your Honor. Dr. Liu, would it be helpful if I were to volunteer my law clerk to come up and allow you to show with the trajectory rods the wounds that were sustained by the deceased?
I believe it would add a new dimension to my testimony. Yes.
Okay. Judge, with your permission, may I?
Yes.
Come on up, Will.
May I step down, Your Honor?
Yes, ma'am, please do.
May Dr. Liu step down?
Now, I believe that the Gray's gunshot wound was the first gunshot wound because Ms. Benefield indicated that Mr. Benefield was coming towards her.
Objection, Judge.
I'm going to sustain.
Go ahead, Dr. Liu. You just can't say what Ms. Benefield told you,
Okay.
just based upon your conclusions.
I believe the first gunshot wound.
And I would object to that opinion, Judge.
I'm going to need you to approach, please.
Dr. Liu, without regard to anything that Ms. Benefield may have said that you heard, based upon your expertise and your own conclusions that you reached, do you have an opinion as to which one of these shots may have been fired first?
I believe that the right upper arm raised gunshot wound was the first shot.
Are you able to say why? What independent evidence exists that leads you to that conclusion?
I have based my opinions on the circumstances provided to me.
Okay. And would that be consistent, the upper right arm wound, would it be consistent with the bullet that went down the hall, for example, and lodged in a book?
Yes, it would be, because it didn't go into the body, it just went across the skin. So the bullet would be free to continue on into another room.
Okay, and because it is just a graze, it would not have any tissue effect or mushrooming, as they say, correct?
Objection. Objection. Lack of knowledge.
If she can testify to that from her knowledge and experience.
Because it only grazed the skin, nothing went into the hollow point nose of the projectile to cause deformity or mushrooming of the projectile. So it would be more or less pristine.
All right. Now, you've told us, Dr. Liu, about the shock to the spinal cord from the shot that entered the chest.
Yes, going from front to back and right to left.
Would that have, in your opinion, affected Mr. Benefield's ability to stand?
Yes, as I explained earlier, it would cause a spinal cord shock, causing paralysis of the legs and causing Mr. Benefield to fall.
And in falling, would it be consistent that his legs would go up in the air almost as if he slipped on a banana peel?
Yes, that would be consistent, and I can demonstrate.
Please.
The right side facing the chair.
Judge, with the court's permission, could the jurors perhaps stand so that they could see this demonstration?
The right side facing.
Judge, I'm confused as to what we're demonstrating.
We're demonstrating the shot to the leg.
Oh, the shot to the leg.
Yes, sir.
Okay, folks, if you need to stand to reposition yourself.
Now, the entrance was on the right side. Okay. The entrance was on the right side of the back of the calf, and the exit was here. Now, you can see that the gun would be somewhere along here. So you can see how consistent this pathway would be from getting shot while he's on the ground with the gun being in this position. So it's going in here and coming out here.
Okay, so this would be, in effect, a snapshot in time.
Yes, it happens very quickly.
All right. And would it be consistent, Dr. Liu, with the shot to the chest, paralysis, Mr. Benefield falling backwards, his legs going up in the air, and another shot going through the leg?
Yes.
All right.
The evidence on the body, which consists of those gunshot wounds, is consistent with that.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Will. I have one last question for you, Dr. Liu. You can take the witness stand. Do you recall whether there was any other injury to Mr. Benefield that would be consistent with his legs going up in the air and him falling backwards so that his head would hit a tile floor?
Yes, Dr. Vega found an abraded contusion on the back of the head. A contusion is a bruise. An abraded contusion means that there's a little bit of scraping of the skin or crushing of the skin in the center of that bruise. That is entirely consistent with Mr. Benefield's back of the head striking either the wall or the floor as he fell on his back.
Thank you very much, Dr. Liu. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
I just want to ask you about the leg wound.
Yes.
For a moment. You're not saying that that is the only position that he could have been in, are you?
No, I am not saying that.
Okay. So there are other positions that maybe could have produced that wound path.
Yes,
Okay. The one that you are describing is just one that is consistent with it.
that is correct.
And when you said his spinal cord would be, I don't know what you said, shocked maybe?
Yes.
Concussed? I don't know what you said. And his legs would go paralyzed.
Yes.
Does that normally mean that they stiffen, they straighten? Does it mean they crumble? What does it mean?
Different people react differently depending on the position that they're in. And paralysis usually means just not being able to move.
Okay, so depending on maybe what movement they're doing at the time, that's what they're going to continue to do.
Possibly,
So,
yes.
possibly. So if he is walking towards someone, would he fall backwards with paralyzed legs?
Well, We weren't there, so I don't know exactly his body positioning and movements.
Okay. And you spoke about the abraded contusion on the head, and that can be consistent with falling
Yes.
from a gunshot. Can it also be consistent with being drug out of the house by EMTs?
Not unless that part of the head were to be struck on something, because the contusion is a bruise which requires blunt force.
Right. So if, for instance, he was being drug out and hit the door jamb or something, bounced his head, could it have caused that kind of a braided contusion on the head?
Well, done with enough force, that is possible.
Okay. Thank you. No further questions.
Direct.
One. Dr. Liu, would the abrasion wound to the right arm of Mr. Benefield be consistent with him lunging towards Miss Benefield?
Remember, the pathway is from front to back and upward. So if he was lunging and you were the shooter, you can see how that would be consistent.
That's all. Thank you.
Do you have any questions on that?
No.
All right, can this witness be released? Can the witness be released?
Yes, sir.
State? Ma'am, you're released from your subpoena. You're free to go.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Taylor?
We have this one issue left.
Okay. All right, members of the jury, there's a legal argument I need to take up. If you could step out for about 10 minutes for me, we'll do that, then we'll bring you right back. No deliberations, no communicating with anybody about what we've talked about the case, and don't do any research on any of the issues. We'll get you right back as soon as we can. Okay, oh, you all can have a seat. The jury's out. And was this the issue, the Richardson?
No, this is the DNA issue.
Oh, yes.
And I have the following case for the court. Ladies,
Thank you.
ma'am.
Yes, sir. All right, go ahead, sir. I've had a chance to review shorter.
Okay, so this was a DNA report, precisely what the circumstances are here. The state initially wanted to introduce it, but then changed their mind because it didn't have any inculpatory conclusions for purposes of the defendant. At that point, the defense moved to introduce it because it was exculpatory. The court allowed the admissibility as a business record, distinguishing it from Crawford because since it was the defense that was seeking to admit it, the confrontation issue was not essential. And on appeal, the appellate court sustained that admission under the business record exception, which is precisely what the circumstances are here, Your Honor. So I can't imagine that the state is going to, and I would further say to the court, the chain of custody is irrelevant. We're not objecting to the chain of custody. I can't imagine that the state would object to their own chain of custody. So we think that the shorter case clearly establishes that the court can admit that DNA profile, the results, as a business record.
Judge, I thought I made it abundantly clear. I'm not objecting to it being a business record certification. That's what I said 6 times. My objection is that there has been no foundation laid to then make that report relevant. That is hearsay in the report. That the fact that those swabs are identified to Ashley Benefield or Doug Benefield is hearsay to DNA labs. That means some crime scene tech who did not testify before this jury went and collected his DNA stain card. A different crime scene tech who testified she swabbed her but was not shown swabs to make sure those are the correct swabs, then swabbed her and put those in proper evidence. That's all. We don't have any evidence that the same swabs that she was collected then went to DNA labs. And that's what you have to lay the proper foundation. And this is the case I was referring to when I didn't refer to it by name, but this is what I read when I made my objections, because my objections are what I've already stated, but also 403, just that lab report in evidence. This is very confusing. It's DNA, and it's overly prejudicial to this jury for what I think what it says is this state didn't argue, and I am arguing, how the forensic casework would be unfairly prejudicial or confusing in regards to the work of the jury. This is DNA. I don't know, they sent us the bench notes and the report, but there's no explanation of the statistics, how they came upon those statistics, where those swabs came from, all those things, and I think that will be very confusing to the jury without somebody here. So I'm not making a certified business records objection. I'm making an objection to the contents, and that there hasn't been an adequate foundation, and that they're confusing.
Sure. In rebuttal?
Yeah, so the court recalls that Detective Warren sent the swabs to the lab. Megan Dorvac testified that she swabbed Miss Benefield. I asked her why. She said because it would show who had touched her. The court should recall, consult your notes, Your Honor. Miss Benefield testified that Douglas Benefield grabbed her by the hand and spun her around as she tried to leave the house. This report corroborates that to the extent of, I think, 720,000 times more likely. We think it's an essential component of our defense. Now, we don't have any. Chain of custody is irrelevant. Even though they've just basically undermined their own chain of custody, it's not an issue. It's the result that for our purposes and our defense is essential, Your Honor. This case allowed it to be admitted as a business record. The assistant has made eminently clear that that is not why she's challenging it as a business record. I don't seek to introduce the entire report. I will be quite happy reading these two sentences, if I may.
Thank you, because I haven't seen this. Thank you. All right, final thoughts? Is that everything?
Yes, sir.
This is, what I've been handed is not marked as an exhibit. It's a 5-page document from DNA Labs International. It actually, it's a letter or a report to Detective Justin Warren and a sergeant at the Manatee County Sheriff's Office. And it is signed by Jerome Rem, R-E-M-M, Forensic DNA Analyst. It lists a number of items . 14 different items that were apparently sent to DNA labs for DNA testing. And the particular section, the defense says they want to admit is agency item number MRD5, which would correspond to DNA Labs International item 20-10880, swab from suspect's right hand. And it says that the testing was done. Mixture of 2 individuals, at least 1 male contributor. And it says Doug Benefield and John Sant could not be ruled out as possible contributors to this foreign DNA profile. And it gives, based on its testing, 2 different propositions that were considered to explain the results. One is the DNA profile obtained from the swabs is 720,000 times more probable if the sample originated from Ashley Benefield, Doug Benefield, and 2 unknown persons than if it originated from Ashley Benefield and 3 unknown persons. So there's strong support that Ashley Benefield, Doug Benefield, and 2 unknown persons contributed to the profile rather than Ashley Benefield and 3 unknown persons.
So don't have to read that next sentence.
I am. I'm reading it as I go.
Okay, thanks, sir.
If applicable to the case, it is recommended that reference standards from any first-degree relatives of Doug Benefield be submitted for additional comparisons. And I think this is the second proposition that DNA Labs is considering. The DNA lab profile obtained from the swabs is approximately 75 million times more probable if the sample originated from Ashley Benefield and 3 unknown persons than if it originated from Ashley Benefield, John Sant, and 2 unknown persons. Therefore, there is extremely strong support that Ashley Benefield and 3 unknown persons contributed to this DNA profile rather than Ashley Benefield, John Sant, and 2 unknown persons. The DNA profiles of additional contributors to the mixture were not determined. However, there's results that are suitable for comparison. All right, so obviously those of us who have done a number of these cases understand what those statistics mean when you're looking at known standards versus unknown DNA samples or swabs and the comparisons. I am not sure, and I do not have the belief that the interpretation of DNA results as outlined in this DNA Labs report is within the common knowledge of a lay juror, a regular juror. That's why the standard we usually see is one of the parties, whoever it is, whoever the proponent of the evidence is, calling the DNA analyst, generally after showing and evincing whoever took the sample, packaged it, where it was stored. It was then sent from the property and evidence room to the DNA lab. Then the DNA lab analyst will say how they went and got it. And I'm just going to disagree that chain of custody is not important. That's why we have it, and that's why we have certain predicates to establish evidence from a crime scene to court and who touched it and how it changed and what was done to it. So I disagree that that's not important.
Isn't that when the defense contests?
In the problem, well, I gave everybody the chance to argue.
Sorry.
So I got a chance to read the shorter case, and the shorter case supports what the court is saying. It says that they leave the issue for another day, whether it could qualify as a business record. However, there remains, and this is at 692 of the decision. However, there remains a very significant section 90.403 concern about the admissibility of a DNA forensic report if the expert preparing the report does not testify. And the reason the fourth DCA, it says so in the very next paragraph, the reason the fourth DCA upheld the admission was for that very reason, that the state did not argue 403. And here they are. Here the state has argued the 403 for a jury to understand what these mean, what these findings mean. I don't find that the probative value is, I do find the probative value is substantially outweighed by the danger of the confusion of the issues, the misleading of the jury to try and understand what this report says, and be subject to cross-examination from, well, this time it'd be the state, but it's usually the defense, to explain, where do you get this? How do you get 720,000 times? How many loci were matched? How did you conduct these evaluations? And then what does it mean, the very strong support?
That is.
And then it's also, you've got, the other problem is, Mr. Taylor, you're telling me you only want to read this, you said two sentences. Yeah, these two sentences that are highlighted.
Correct.
But that's only one of the two sets of propositions that could potentially explain this. And the first proposition you want to use doesn't even mention Mr. Sant. And if I'm reading this correctly, there's also a recommendation that there should be some additional testing. There's also additional DNA profiles that are in these mixtures from Ms. Benefield's right hand that are suitable for comparison and have not been compared. So, I mean, I have significant concerns about the misleading of the jury by putting this in.
Can I make my record?
It would, if it would, so, no, sir. Based upon the request that's before me, which is only to put in and read into evidence these two sentences regarding one of the propositions that was considered by DNA labs and interpreting their test results, certainly that would be even more misleading because it doesn't get into the other proposition and the other testing that needs to be done. So based upon that, do you want to have this marked and put into evidence?
Yes,
As a
I'd
proffer?
like to proffer for the record, Your Honor.
Do you want to put a number on it? What's your next number?
It's 29, but this is the whole record.
Well, hold on, you're handing me a stack of paper that's about, what, 1.5 inches tall?
Yes.
And the only thing you said you were going to enter was this 5-page.
Well, no, I said the only thing I wanted to enter was to read those 2 sentences. This is the full report.
All right. So it would be your intention to admit into evidence Defendant's Exhibit 29. What, is this in here, or does this go in here?
Yeah, no, that I believe is in there.
No, it goes.
This comes back.
It goes.
Oh, I'm sorry, Your Honor, I stand corrected. This goes in with the report.
Or I'll let you put it where you want it.
All right. Can I make a proffer for the record?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Oh, wait, beyond, I thought you already did. This is the proffer.
Well, I'd like to make a verbal proffer as to precisely why I think it should be admissible.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so unlike a DNA report that's inculpatory, which requires a chain of custody so that justice is established in the admission of inculpatory evidence, in this instance, Judge, we believe this DNA report is exculpatory. And we believe it's exculpatory because it confirms Miss Benefield's testimony that Doug grabbed her by the hand and spun her around as she tried to flee. It's independent evidence that not only corroborates Miss Benefield's testimony, but also corroborates our defense. And because it is exculpatory, chain of custody is irrelevant. We are making no objections to chain of custody. The case law that I submitted to the court, the shorter case, clearly would allow it. And it would be my intention, which I don't think is confusing at all to the jury, to tell them the DNA, reading from the report, the DNA profile obtained from the swabs is approximately 720,000 times more probable if the sample originated from Ashley Benefield, Douglas Benefield, and 2 unknown persons than if it originated from Ashley Benefield and 3 unknown persons. Now, maybe I misunderstand this, Your Honor, but to me what that says is there's 720,000 times more probable that Doug Benefield touched Ashley Benefield's hand. That's what I believe this says, and that's what I think we should be entitled to get to the jury.
All right, thank you. Where do you want that right after the first page?
You put it right on top, Your Honor.
It'll cover up the exhibit number then.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
So I'm just putting it right behind it. And as I said in my ruling, I think that those questions and what that means and how it's interpreted and how the jury can use that to be relevant to its deliberations and its findings. I'm not saying it's not relevant. I'm saying the problem is 403, as the 4th DCA recognized, not having that analyst causes significant 403 problems with confusion and misleading. So that's the basis of my ruling.
What if I told the court that the actual DNA lab expert is available, but not until after 2 tomorrow? And it would have to be by Zoom.
There's motions that Florida Rule of Criminal Procedure 3.116 defines how and when that can happen. So we need to bring the jury back in, and I just need to know if if your intention is to call more witnesses or if you're resting.
Well, I make a formal request that the court abate the proceedings so that we could call the analysis. If the court denies that, then we will rest.
All right, well, there's, Florida Rule of Criminal Procedure 3.116 is very specific. It just came into effect, it was just substantially, I'll say substantially, amended effective July 1st of this year regarding the use of remote technology. If you want some time to look at that, I can certainly give you that.
I'm familiar with it.
So do you have a,
We'll rest.
okay. Let me bring the jury in. I will, we can do that, then I can let them go for the evening. I'll tell them to be back tomorrow morning at 8:45, just like we've been doing with a 9 o'clock start.
Yes, sir.
Judge, just so you know also, we had submitted, the court may recall, requested copies of the proposed homicide charge. And we had submitted our version to you that we thought would be appropriate. And I did not save a copy of it, so I wonder if the court has it.
I will have to look. Did you send it by email?
No, I believe we handed it to Your Honor.
Welcome back, everybody. Y'all can have a seat. All right, did anybody do any deliberations, talk with anybody outside the jury, or do any research? All right, everybody says no. Mr. Taylor?
Yes, Your Honor, Ms. Benefield has no further witnesses, and we rest on her behalf.
All right, sir. Folks, at this point, it's 4:30. The attorneys and I have some work to do before we can get things going again in your realm of the case. So what I'm going to do is let you go for the evening. If you could please be back tomorrow morning at the jury assembly room around 8:45, just like today. There were probably people down there today. I don't think, was there any civil juries or do you know? There might be a smaller group tomorrow. There might be some judges in civil court picking some juries. So find your area and kind of hang out. And we'll have the deputies come down and get you as soon as we're ready and bring you up and get started.
Yes, sir.
All right, remember the rules for tonight? Don't talk amongst yourselves. Don't talk about the case with anybody else, and don't research about people, places, things, or legal topics.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Oh, you all can have a seat. All right, I'm going to have to give you all, let me give you guys a 5-minute break. I'm going to go upstairs, and I don't have it in the pile I have with me, but I have a whole other pile. So let me run upstairs and see if I can
I had
find.
it clipped.
Yeah, it was,
Yeah.
yes.
And I have the state's proposed jury instructions and the standard for self-defense because it changed in May, and I just wanted to include it in case we need
So
to.
you got the new one?
Yes.
All right.
But I brought the standard because the instructions are very different than they used to be, so I just brought an extra copy so we could go through
And you
it.
get an extra copy for,
Yes.
so 5 minutes, I'll be right back down as soon as I check.
Thank you.